Many Mamluks broke and fled. Napoleon ordered Bonne and Viol's divisions to advance. Again the Mamluks attacked. Again they were shattered by musketry and bayonets as the enemy cavalry collapsed. Bonne and Viol's men stormed into Mbaba. It was a massacre. Those who weren't cut down fled to the Nile, where hundreds drowned. Murad Bey escaped with the remains of his cavalry to Giza, from where he retreated south. Ibrahim Bey, watching the disaster unfold across the river, pulled his forces back to Cairo. It was a lopsided rout. Over in just 2 hours, the Mamluks suffered over 5,000 casualties, including most of their elite cavalry and many commanders. The French lost fewer than 300 men, mostly wounded. With his usual flair for publicity, Napoleon declared the victory would be known as the Battle of the Pyramids. Within sight of those ancient monuments, looming in the southern haze, on July 24, Napoleon entered Cairo. Parts of the city had been abandoned and reduced to ashes burned during the Mamluks' chaotic retreat. Napoleon remarked, "It is hard to find a land more rich, or a people more wretched, ignorant, and brutal. Yet Cairo was the heart of Egypt, a city of 600,000 people, now in French hands." With the Mamluk forces scattered and on the run, Napoleon's dream of an eastern conquest seemed within reach. But just 8 days later, that dream began to unravel at sea. Nelson and the British Mediterranean fleet had never stopped hunting for the French, and on the afternoon of August 1st, Nelson finally found them anchored in Abaco Bay, with 14 ships of the line against 13. He made the bold decision to attack that very evening. The British won a complete and spectacular victory. The giant French flagship, L'Orient, was blown apart in a catastrophic explosion. By the time the battle ended, the British had destroyed or captured 11 French warships and taken over 3,000 prisoners. Now, Napoleon was stranded in Egypt. Worse, most of the army's cash reserves had been stored aboard L'Orient. But Napoleon didn't despair. If anything, he was energized by the crisis. His options were now simple. He and his army would have to live off the land or perish. While General Desaix was sent south in pursuit of Murad Bey, Napoleon set about reforming Egypt's government. The old feudal system was abolished. A postal service and hospitals were established, along with a new tax code. Napoleon also founded the Institute of Egypt. To foster scientific and academic study, he showed great interest in Islam, funding the construction of mosques and encouraging the celebration of religious festivals. Such efforts soon gave rise to rumors that Napoleon had converted to Islam. In truth, it was only a calculated move to win local favor. Meanwhile, news reached Napoleon that his wife, Josephine, had resumed her affair with a former lover, something he believed was now common gossip in Paris. 2004 he comforted himself with his own affairs, including one with the wife of a fellow officer. But efforts to win over the Egyptian people met with complete failure. To most Egyptians, the French were simply foreign occupiers and infidels. Tensions simmered dangerously. Small uprisings broke out throughout the Nile Delta, brutally crushed by the French. Then, in September, from Constantinople, Sultan Selim III declared a holy war against the French. Now, Egypt was a powder keg. Cairo, October 21, 1798. General Dupuy, the city's military governor, was called in to deal with what seemed a minor disturbance. He found locals erecting barricades and was attacked and killed. Soon, the entire city was in open revolt. The French responded with ruthless discipline, crushing the uprising. About 300 French soldiers were killed, along with thousands of Egyptians. Napoleon offered public amnesty to the leaders, while privately instructing Berthier that any Rioters, caught with weapons, should be beheaded and their bodies thrown into the Nile. The French had regained control of Cairo, but in a blood-soaked victory, and it was now clear that Napoleon would never win the hearts and minds of the Egyptian people. The following months saw the French growing weaker in Cairo. Communication with France was almost non-existent. Homesickness and a lack of supplies, ammunition and wine, all took their toll. There was also an outbreak of the plague, tormenting the army and thinning its ranks. The only action was to the south, where General Desaix, with a force of 2,800 men, pursued Murad Bey deep into Upper Egypt in this epic chase. One officer distinguished himself, a 28-year-old cavalry brigade commander named Louis Nicholas. Devout, on January 22, 1799, he and Desaix dealt a crushing defeat to Murad Bey, scattering what remained of his forces. Murad himself escaped and remained at large. But such military victories did little to change the grim outlook of Napoleon's campaign. They were still 1,600 miles from France, with no hope of reinforcements or return. Napoleon briefly placed his hopes in diplomacy. Charles Maurice Talleyrand, France's suave, cunning, and clever foreign minister, had once supported the Egyptian expedition. He assured Napoleon he would personally travel to Constantinople to smooth things over with the Sultan and claim Egypt for France. But Talleyrand never left Paris. The Sultan remained furious at the French invasion of his province. There would be no negotiations and no compromise. Orders went out across the Ottoman Empire to raise troops and expel the invaders. Napoleon's position seemed more hopeless than ever. His army isolated, ravaged by disease, surrounded by a hostile population. He responded in the only way that seemed natural to him, as his hero Alexander the Great once had. He would attack. May 1798, a vast French invasion force was sailing across the Mediterranean. 55,000 men aboard more than 300 ships, escorted by 13 ships of the line. On the mightiest of them all, the 120-gun L'Orient, flew the flag of General Napoleon. Bonaparte, France's celebrated hero of the Italian campaigns. He had just received new orders from his government. Napoleon was to lead an expedition eastwards, to Egypt, the richest province of the Ottoman Empire, and to all educated Europeans, a land of ancient wonders and mystery. After 6 years of war in Europe, France's last remaining enemy was Britain. The conquest of Egypt would strike a serious blow to Britain, disrupting its trade in the eastern Mediterranean and threatening its vital connection to India and the East. These lucrative trade routes were essential to funding Britain's war effort. Moreover, the campaign promised to extend the French revolutionary mission of civilization and liberty to the people of Egypt, freeing them from superstition and feudal tyranny. The corrupt and self-serving French government, the Directory, saw to other advantages, the chance to seize immense wealth, and the opportunity to send the dangerously ambitious and popular General Bonaparte far from Paris, a city where coups and conspiracies were never far from anyone's mind. Napoleon himself was elated. This was an expedition he had worked hard to secure and organize. It was his chance to win new glory and follow in the footsteps of his idols, Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great. Like Alexander, Napoleon even dreamed of marching to India, to strike at the British there. Europe is a molehill, he told his secretary, Brienne. We must head east. That is where all the greatest glories have been won. But the Mediterranean was a dangerous sea for the French. While the armies of the Republic had triumphed on land, the Royal Navy had established itself as the supreme naval power of the age. With decisive victories over France's allies, Spain at Cape St. Vincent, and the Dutch at Camperdown, Rear Admiral Sir Horatio Nelson and his squadron of 14 ships of the line were now patrolling the Mediterranean. Nelson knew a large French fleet had left Toulon, but its destination remained a closely guarded secret. Unseen, the French expedition hugged the Italian coast and sailed south. On June 9th, the fleet arrived off the island of Malta. It was ruled by the Knights of St. John, a religious military order dating back to the Crusades. But France wanted the island as a naval base and as a thorn in Britain's side. In 1565, the Knights had famously resisted a vast Ottoman army for 3 months, but now, reviled by locals and divided among themselves, the Knights surrendered to Napoleon in just 2 days. In 6 days on Malta, Napoleon overhauled its ancient government, established schools, abolished slavery, and requisitioned treasure and supplies. Then he set sail for Egypt, leaving General Vauban and a garrison of 5,000 to hold the island. But where was the Royal Navy? Back in May, Nelson's squadron had been scattered by a storm. Now reunited, Nelson correctly guessed Napoleon's destination and was racing to intercept. If he caught the French transports and artillery at sea, he could destroy Napoleon's army before it ever reached land. Then came a stroke of luck for the French. On the night of June 22nd, Nelson's fleet sailed past the French convoy by just a few miles. But due to thick fog and darkness, neither side realized how close they were. The British continued to Alexandria, but found no sign of the French. Frustrated, Nelson waited 24 hours, then sailed north to resume his search. Just hours later, Napoleon's ships began arriving off Alexandria. Under the cover of night, 5,000 French infantry came ashore. At dawn they stormed Alexandria, quickly overwhelming its garrison. The rest of the army disembarked safely. Napoleon had brought 38,000 men to Egypt, mostly veterans of the Army of Italy. There were 5 infantry divisions under Generals Bonne, Desaix, Kleber, Manu, and Rainier. The sole cavalry division was commanded by the towering figure of Thomas Alexander Dumas. He was France's first black general, born in what is now Haiti. To a French nobleman and an enslaved African woman, he had earned fame for his actions. In Italy, where the Austrians nicknamed him the Black Devil, other familiar faces from Italy included Napoleon's tireless chief of staff, General Berthier, his aide-de-camp, Colonel Murat, and brigade commanders General Lannes and General Marmont. The army was accompanied by 167 scholars, scientists, artists, and specialists, even a balloonist. Together they were known as the Savants and had come to study Egypt's natural and historical wonders. But both they and Napoleon were bitterly disappointed by Alexandria, the once legendary city, founded by Alexander the Great, had shrunk after centuries of earthquakes and abandonment. It was now a dilapidated town of just 6,000 people. Egypt, in name, was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. In reality, power lay with local Mamluk warlords, especially Murad Bey and Ibrahim Bey. The Mamluks were originally slave soldiers who had served the Islamic Caliphate. Now fearless horsemen and proud warriors, they ruled Egypt with an iron grip, hoarding wealth and leaving the peasantry in poverty. To most Egyptians, they were despised foreign overlords, a fact Napoleon hoped to exploit through propaganda. To the Egyptian people, he declared, "I have come to restore your rights and punish the usurpers. I respect God, his prophet, and the Quran." Meanwhile, Murad and Ibrahim summoned other Mamluk lords to Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, where they vowed to raise an army and crush the invaders. Napoleon believed his best option was to strike fast. Less than a day after his troops finished disembarking, he began marching on Cairo, but he underestimated the blazing heat and harsh desert terrain. He was forced to quicken the pace, even as his men ran out of water and collapsed with thirst. Hundreds perished. Some committed suicide to escape the agony. Bedouin horsemen circled the French like vultures, capturing, torturing, and killing any stragglers. Even trusted officers like Lannes and Murat began to openly question Napoleon's decisions. It took for days for the army to cover 45 miles to Demanha, where they finally rested, found water, and bartered for food. It came not a moment too soon. News arrived. A large Mamluk force under Murad Bey was approaching from the southeast. The French advanced to meet them at Shubrikit, on the Nile River. When 4,000 Mamluk cavalry appeared, the French were dazzled by their brightly colored uniforms, glittering with gold, jewels, and ornate weaponry, pistols, sabers, daggers, and spears. Murad boasted he would slice off French heads like melons in the field. But for all their bravery and display, the Mamluks lacked the discipline or tactics to face a modern, well-trained army. Napoleon formed his troops into massive infantry. Squares, the Mamluk cavalry could do little but circle helplessly, unable to break through walls of French bayonets. They were picked off from horseback. After 2 hours, the Mamluks withdrew. Having suffered around 1,000 casualties, the French had lost almost none. The victory was a major morale boost after the desert ordeal. The Mamluks retreated to Mbaba, a small town across the Nile from Cairo. There, in full view of Egypt's legendary pyramids, just 9 miles south, they would make their stand, with their full force. On the sweltering afternoon of July 21st, Napoleon's army approached Mbaba. He had 25,000 men, ranged in 5 huge squares with cavalry, supply wagons inside, and artillery at every corner. Murad, as bold as ever, crossed to the Nile's west bank, abandoning Ibrahim. Their total numbers remain uncertain, but their elite cavalry numbered 6,000. Drawn up between the village of Biktal and the fortified town of Mbaba, defended by Ottoman infantry and peasant militia. Napoleon's plan was simple: break through the enemy center and crush their right flank against the river. At 3:30 p.m., Desaix's and Rainier's divisions advanced, but as they crossed broken terrain, their formations wavered. Murad seized his chance and launched his cavalry. The Mamluks charged at full speed. The French held their fire until the last second, then unleashed a devastating volley. Men and horses were torn down. Those who survived had no way to close in. Caught in a deadly storm of musket fire, Mamluk cavalry regrouped, but each new charge ended the same.